So The Sensorites is not a well-remembered serial of Doctor Who. While it has its connections to modern stories and has its fans, the serial as a whole is a bit of a messy bore, but with a good message. But let's see why that is. So The Sensorites begins with a mystery. The TARDIS has landed but is still moving, which turns out to be because it's landed on a spaceship. But before that we have a nice moment between the quartet as they reminisce about their travel so far and how they've come together.
Yes, it all started out as a mild curiosity in the junkyard. Now it's turned out to be quite a great spirited adventure, don't you think?
Yes, taking us back to prehistoric times, the Daleks,
Marco Polo, Marinus, and the Aztecs.
It's a good moment to have in this sort of a show where the characters were basically enemies at the beginning and have slowly come together. And you know what? I'm glad the moment's not at the start of a series finale, as it feels more special. It's not a case of this is the end so let's remember how far we've come, which is something I kind of loathe in a show which is continuous but keeps wrapping things up. It has a feeling of development and impact, rather than necessity. Although Barbara does say she's over the events of the Aztecs, when noting her concern about what could be outside the TARDIS, which is a bit quick to happen, as although we don't know how long it's been for them, for the audience it's been a week. But I'm not going to make a big deal about it, as there's plenty more to make a big fuss about. For another compliment to the story, episode 1 is really strong, mostly due to the many mysteries going on. Beginning with the mystery of why the TARDIS is still moving, we move on to the mystery of the ship, as the crew are seemingly dead and due to the mechanics of their watches have been so for hours, but their body temperature suggests that this is a recent occurrence. A beautifully creepy atmosphere, which this episode continues to reinforce with almost a constant building of mystery. It turns out that the crew were in fact not dead, but instead under the power of the Sensorites, and with the help of the quartet are revived. From them we learn about the Sensorites, or at least as much as they know. This being that the Sensorites have some sort of power over people's minds, and have been keeping them in orbit of the Sensphere, the home of the Sensorites, preventing all escape and feeding them to keep them alive, but not showing themselves. As far as the race are concerned, this is a very strange mystery, and a great way to build them up. Compared to the Daleks where we learnt about them after meeting them, the fact we're learning about the Sensorites before meeting them allows the mind to ponder them and wonder. Unless you're the quartet who decide to leave and abandon the crew to their fate of being constantly put in a near-death state, unable to ever return home as prisoners of these horrific Sensorites, stopped only by the revelation that the TARDIS lock has been removed. Wait, the TARDIS lock has been removed? Okay, that may sound weird, but somehow a Sensorite who was hiding on the ship removes the TARDIS lock, preventing any access, forcing the quartet to remain. Much like with the keys of Marinus before it, the writers haven't really come up with the idea of the quartet wanting to stay and help, choosing to leave as soon as the opportunity allows it. This definitely suits the early characterisation we're seeing in the Doctor, but for the others it feels questionable and is harming their characters, although this problem does work itself out eventually. It does feel like a formula which has gotten out of hand, or the writers are very hit and miss on how to prevent the quartet from leaving. Looking back through the series, we've had separation from the TARDIS, the Doctor sabotaging the TARDIS and then having the fluid link stolen, the TARDIS key being taken by Marco Polo, a force field to force a hand, a one-way door in the tomb, and now the removal of the lock. Yeah, maybe the Doctor's arc to become a force for good might be more of a way out of thinking of new ideas to have him stay for a serial. I mean, they're already scraping the bottom of the barrel for ideas. Anyway, the serial. With the quartet trapped, they have no choice but to help and get the lock back. This leads to the quartet saving the ship which has been put on collision course with the Sensphere, as the crew have been paralysed by the Sensorites. And this is perhaps our first plot hole, as the Sensorites have gone out of their way to prevent the humans from dying, at least through starvation, but are now trying to destroy the ship by crashing it into their own planet. I'd like to say this has an explanation later, but it doesn't. It's just an action set piece for the first episode. Plot-wise, it could make sense. We know a Sensorite is on board the ship, so potentially it was a test for the quartet, or perhaps an experiment which they were planning to end before a crash, but this is never brought up again. And from what we later learn about the Sensorites, it's not the sort of thing they do. And on that Sensorite, the dialogue in the episode implies that there are no Sensorites on board, and only arrive at the end, which is when they reveal themselves for the first time. Are we dealing with a rogue Sensorite? Perhaps some sort of enemy for the series? No. This is a plot device Sensorite. There is a villainous Sensorite, but this is not him. So Barbara and Susan go to the back of the ship and meet John, a man who has gone mad due to his mind being open to the Sensorites. And John is a very strong character. He embodies the creepy atmosphere that this episode has. As we learn, he is a good person, but with his mind open he's dangerous, sealing Barbara and Susan in the back of the ship with him. But before doing anything to them, he collapses and weeps, causing Barbara to console him. The Doctor, Ian and the rest of the crew make an attempt to get into the back of the ship, but are forced to stop when the Sensorites arrive, in what is a favourite cliffhanger of this series.
Doctor.
Although it was reshot for the opening of episode 2, and continuity aside with how Carol is placed, the tension is nowhere near as strong. The Sensorite isn't creepy and crawling up the glass, he's just sort of standing there, rising up a bit. Plus, due to the actor being different, the look of the Sensorite changes, and it's a bit more plain. So given I've spent this long on episode 1, time to speed things up a little with a more general discussion. With episode 2 we begin to learn about the Sensorites. They fear the dark, they don't like loud noises, and have the ability to communicate across vast distances with a force transmitter, although their ability to control human minds is gone. This is partly due to the Doctor figuring out how this control occurs, but it's really something that could have come in useful to the Sensorite villain later on. Perhaps by tricking someone or catching them off guard, be better than his actual plans. We also learn that Susan has some limited telekinetic abilities, which allows her to have a level of power over the Sensorites, and allows her to use the force transmitter without the same risks that other non-Sensorites would have. Most of the Sensorites' weaknesses are revealed when they're confronted by Ian and Barbara, showing them as very timid when confronted with the threat of violence from Ian. Although based on Barbara's higher kill count from Marinus, they should be more afraid of her. By the end of episode 2, the Sensorites have forced Susan's hand to return to the Sensphere with them, otherwise they kill everyone.
Go down with them to their planet. Otherwise we'll all be killed.
This episode does have some great Susan moments, showing her more alien nature which has been missing for almost the entire series. The fact she has unique telekinetic abilities which even the Doctor seems to lack, although that could be due to age, and that she's willing to go to the Sensphere alone to protect her friends, giving her authority which she lacked and showing a stronger, less timid side to her, instead of screaming at the situation. Unfortunately, this is basically immediately overwritten by the Doctor telling her no and arguing with her. Now, while it definitely comes from a place of love and protection, it does ruin the moment where Susan finally does something impactful and grows, and makes the cliffhanger even more of a "the episode needs to end now." So from this, the Sensorites agree to take the Doctor, Ian, Susan, John and Carol to the Sensphere to talk, leaving Barbara and Maitland on the ship. And this is because the plot needs a way to write out Barbara for 2 weeks so that Jacqueline Hill can have a holiday. So Barbara gets 2.5 episodes off. I also want to note that Maitland doesn't appear in any more episodes, making this his final, meaning he has no reaction to John's recovery, nor the resolution of the events which led to his ship being captured, and his mind being put under the power of the Sensorites. And now we're on the Sensphere, everything begins to fall apart. Here we meet the leaders of the Sensorites, those being the First Elder, the Second Elder, and the City Administrator. Guess which one of these three is the villain, and why it's the City Administrator. We also learn more about the Sensorites as a people. As stated before, they are a peaceful people, who have a military, or at least warriors who fight, scientists who science, and the elders who lead. Now yes, I suppose having warriors doesn't mean they have a military. It's probably closer to a security force of some sort, as their weapons are for stunning rather than killing, with the exception of their disintegration gun, which has its own special room. Wait, what? So the disintegration gun has the ability to seemingly kill anyone in the Sensorite city, as the city administrator intends to use it to kill the humans and gives coordinates. I just want to note that the disintegrator isn't an actual gun, all we see is a control panel in the room, and so how does it kill? I mean, it uses coordinates, then how on earth does it... You know what? It doesn't matter, questions for later. So this conflict between the city administrator and the elders comes from a distrust of humans due to a disease which has been spreading on the Sensphere ever since a previous human ship exploded in the atmosphere of the planet. This occurred 10 years before, and in that time, the Sensorites haven't put 2 and 2 together and figured out what is causing the disease. Something that seems a lot easier than you think, as Ian gets struck by the disease, and the Doctor quickly figures out that the disease is in the water, due to the fact that the elders have never been infected and they drink from a completely different source, that being crystal water, a pure water which is bottled from a mountain. The First Elder offers this water to the visitors, but Ian ended up drinking the commoner's water and was immediately struck down. And again, we're only scratching the surface of the Sensorite stupidity, whether that be the species or the cereal. So the Doctor begins a hunt for the source of the disease and creates a cure. Meanwhile, the city administrator spends either hours or days, depending on how you interpret the montage, searching for the Second Elder so he can take his sash. So for context, while John's mind was being closed, Carol misidentifies the city administrator for a scientist, much to his annoyance, as from the back all the Sensorites look the same. Now if we ignore the fact that from our point of view we can tell the difference between the Sensorites due to the appearance of the actors in the makeup within the show, they all look identical or at least near identical. We still have one small problem with this. So as I said, the city administrator takes the Second Elder's sash so he can pretend to be the Second Elder, an idea which he gains from Carol in what is maybe the best realisation line in history.
I have never thought of that.
So this realisation is clearly something the Sensorites know, as they have these sashes and patterns on their outfits in order to tell each other apart. But the problem with this plan is that the Sensorites are telepaths, and although they need the mind transmitter to talk, they can still listen, meaning that the city administrator can stop the Second Elder from talking but can't respond himself. And so someone should probably notice something is wrong, which nobody does, outside of a passing comment. Yeah, these events actually happen in the serial and are basically throwaway. In fact, the entire existence of the city administrator as the villain is throwaway, as he has absolutely no connection to the disease or any of the already established conflict. He has nothing to do with the TARDIS lock. He's not at least directly responsible for keeping the ship in orbit, and although he does lead to the normal water being given to the humans, leading to Ian being infected, he gives the order off screen as he's too busy with the disintegrator at the time, which goes nowhere. Heck, in an attempt to prove that the humans are lying to the Sensorites and that Ian is only pretending to be ill, he intercepts the cure and destroys it, and then like 2 scenes later Susan has gotten more of a cure, meaning he only delayed the plot. And I think that's a good way to look at the city administrator. Someone who's there to make sure this isn't a 4-parter. He is a throwaway character whose evil scheme manages to just make enough sense to work, but then all his plans fall apart due to the plot not needing him. I kinda feel bad for the guy, not gonna lie. I suppose it's time to talk about the final twist of the serial, and the actual cause of the disease. So the Doctor and Ian go to investigate the aqueduct and discover 3 humans living underground who are fighting a war against the Sensorites. It being revealed that these 3 have gone mad like John, and for the past decades have believed that humanity has been at war with the Sensorites, so that they can have access to the mineral molybdenum, which is a precious material. And you know what? It's a great twist. The ship exploding with some of the captain's crew trying to return to Earth to report the situation, but the ship was sabotaged to prevent it. The disease was caused by them infecting the water supply with Atripa belladonna, deadly nightshade, and creating the illusion of a roaring creature in order to scare off the Sensorites. How they destroyed the Doctor's jacket, which notably the fact he no longer has it saves the character's lives at one point from another of the city administrator's evil schemes, is left unexplained, but I'm sure that's not important. So this plot twist has historical influence, being based on Japanese holdout soldiers from World War II. Those being soldiers who either due to disbelief or lack of communication didn't know about the Japanese surrender and continued to fight the war, or at least would have if they could have. Now for a twist within the story, this is great inspiration, and works perfectly with the message which writer Peter R. Newman was trying to send, that being, war is bad. Best summed up by the First Elder.
They were completely insane. They really believed they were at war with you.
At some time they must have opened their minds or experimented with the mind of transmitters. Every really rational thought was crushed out, and all they had left was the game they played. The game of war.
Now while not subtle, this view does explain a lot about the decisions made by Newman in his writing of the serial, and it is a good message, one of the most important, something we are still yet to learn. So back to the serial. Barbara helps to find the Doctor and Ian who have been captured by the crewmen, and together they are able to trick the 3 crewmen out of the caves and into the hands of the Sensorites, who allow them to return to Earth in the hands of John and company, despite everything they've done, clearly showing an understanding of their delusional state. Oh yeah, John's mind is fixed, and so he's back to normal. Admittedly, the reveal of the crewmen is left a little late, as they are introduced very close to their capture in episode 6, and so there's no real time to build them up and use them as much more than as a way to send a message. Similarly, the city administrator just disappears, and the First Elder tells Ian and Barbara that he'll be dealt with, despite him not being caught out. Yeah, to say this serial has a satisfying conclusion is definitely a stretch. But one thing that is satisfying is when Susan describes her home planet in episode 6.
Grandfather and I don't come from Earth. Oh, it's ages since we've seen our planet. It's quite like Earth. But at night the sky is a burnt orange, and the leaves on the trees are bright silver.
Beyond the description, we don't learn much else other than they're not from Earth, although it is a good reminder that the Doctor and Susan are aliens despite their appearance, and for Susan it's a great moment, seeing her reminisce about the world she left behind her and may never see again. As for the serial's end, it's a bit of a letdown. As I said, we don't see Maitland in episode 6, and so we get to know goodbye, but we do get the first model shot of a spaceship in flight, flying away from the TARDIS. The TARDIS, which was inside the ship that's flying away from it, and which the characters of Ages enter, you know what? Doesn't matter. This final scene has one bigger problem, and that's with character. Ian makes an offhand comment about Maitland and crew knowing where they're going, which the Doctor responds very harshly to, threatening to leave Ian and probably Barbara wherever they next land. For a serial which starts with the quartet recounting their adventures and seeing how far they'd come together, this ending is a kick in the... well, you get the idea. So this has been a long review, and unlike the earlier Keys of Marinus, it's not because of a changing location. As a serial, the Sensorites has a lot wrong with it, from plotting to characters to its pacing, which means there's a lot to talk about and dissect. But you know what? I quite enjoyed it. I wouldn't call myself a fan of the serial. It probably would go in the bad category if I were to rank it, but it's quite enjoyable to watch, from funny flubs to just being able to laugh at how silly it can sometimes be. It's not setting a new high for Doctor Who serials or anything like that, but for a shoddy science fiction adventure, it's not half bad. But next time we have another historical. Will it be able to compete with the competition? The TARDIS next lands in France during the peak of the French Revolution. Next time, the Reign of Terror.